Okay, so Aristotle's investigations into the soul are going to start us off in chapter 1 of book 2 with this quote of thinking about a particular kind of existent thing as a substance, right? So this substance is going to have matter, is going to have shape, matter, shape, and form. And these are the things that are going to turn it into a particular product, right? The idea that has shape, form, it's made of matter. But that matter, according to Aristotle, is only a potential. It is the form, and I'll explain in a second what he means by form, that is the actuality. So for Aristotle, everything that exists is at least composed of these two big parts, form and matter. So if you were to create a study sheet for Aristotle, it would look something like this. Everything, according to Aristotle, has matter and form. Matter is the things of which an object, a substance is made of. The form is going to be more of an essence, more of the essential characteristics that it's going to have. So Aristotle calls the matter the potentiality that a body has, that a thing has, and the form is going to be the actuality. This combination of matter and form is called hylomorphism. And hylomorphism, that's all it means. That means the combination of some sort of substance into a kind of thing, into the production of a thing. For Aristotle, because he has this very scientifically minded, empirically oriented investigation, everything has been created with a purpose, and there are no two things that exist in the world that have the exact same purpose. So if there are different living creatures, he has to discover the function that each one particular living thing has. This is how he's going to come up with his idea of different forms, right, or of different actualities. So potentiality is anything that can at the end have a very particular effect, a very particular purpose. For Aristotle, what we're going to be referring to in these investigations are purposes or causes. So anything that can be created is a potential, right? Plastic has a potential, fabric has a potential, but what makes it precisely into that plastic, precisely into that fabric, is going to be some form of essential being that the thing has. And it's when he talks about that that he's going to talk about actuality. So actuality is exactly the purpose for which the thing was created. For Aristotle, when we start talking about the soul, everything that is a living creature, everything that has organs, right? And he talks about plants having organs, everything that has that is a living organism and is a composite of different things is going to have an actuality. That actuality is going to have the name for it is going to be a soul. But for Aristotle, obviously, the living organism only presents a potential. These are the things that it can do. The soul is going to embed that potential organism with its finite purpose. So for plants, for example, they have only one potentiality for the soul. They can only grow, right? So their soul is going to be only the soul of nutrition, grow, and decay. But when we move on to other living organisms that are a little bit more complex in their matter, their bodies have sensation organs. Aristotle starts talking about touch. He's going to talk about sight later on, right? We start talking about perception, and for Aristotle, that's another way in which we can talk about the existence of a soul. Um, for Aristotle, there's also the idea that some living organisms have locomotions. They can voluntarily, they can at will move from this place to that place, which is something that for him, like, plants don't have, because even if we think that plants move, they usually move in reference to daylight or in reference to sunlight, but they're not willingly moving. So a thing, a living organism, presents a different actuality the moment it has this ability to move on its own, on its free accord. And obviously, Aristotle is going to be trying to talk about how this idea of having an intellect, being able to contemplate reality, is a different form of actuality, a different form of soul, and a soul that it's peculiar to the human being, right? While plants might have this first soul and animals can share on the next three, it is only the combination of these four different forms of actuality that make the human soul. So we can talk about the difference between having one soul or a multiple system of souls. Aristotle is not claiming that there are that, like, for example, a human being has four different souls, but more so that because we're human beings, our actuality is complex, and our actuality actually involves all these four different components. If we were a plant, our actuality would be much simpler, and our soul would be reduced to one simple function. So for Aristotle, this idea of the soul, of having a form, of having an actuality, is going to be linked to the idea of purpose, to the idea of function that the thing is going to receive. Um, in his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle makes a point of bringing up this idea of the soul again, because he thinks that it is very relevant for human beings to be able to fully function. And in order for us to fully function, we don't just have to eat, feel, move. We also have to engage in a rational way with ourselves and with others. That's what would make the perfect form, the perfect being of a human. It doesn't mean that we always realize it. It doesn't mean that we always fulfill that actuality, but because we have the actuality, there is the expectation that we would live up to that point. So Aristotle talks about how everything that has substances, everything that has organs is going to be part of this system that has a soul, that the soul is going to be the essence and first principle of every living body, which is something that Plato and Socrates had not discussed. They had discussed the idea of the soul only in relation to the human existence. For Aristotle, because everything is formed out of matter and actuality, then everything is going to have that first principle, that principle of causation. And that's going to link us to something that is not in your reading, but it's coming out of Aristotelian theory as well. For Aristotle, there are four different causes that are the ones that have put in motion the whole system of Earth, the whole idea of how human beings move and how other things exist. And this is actually something that the Catholic Church is going to use later on when they revive Aristotle in the 600 years of, like, the modern era. For Aristotle, there are material causes, formal causes, official causes, and final causes. Um, if you pay attention here, Aristotle is sort of talking about a theory of design, a theory of how things come into being, material cause, what is it that they're made of, formal cause, what are they supposed to do, efficient cause, um, how and who created, and the final cause, the purpose that this thing had. For Aristotle, everything that exists has a final cause, and that's in his system, that's the cause that it's more difficult to discover, because we can talk about, like, if we think about who if we think about creating, like, he gives the example of something like a corkscrew or a knife or a piece of luggage, right? We can think about the material cause, what is it that we're going to use, the formal cause, how are we going to distribute the different qualities, what are the parts that these luggage or knife or corkscrew are going to have, and what is it for, what is the efficient cause for that object, so that we can create it that way. But we can't fully understand the idea of a final cause, which is actually related to the idea of the existence of different souls, right? How is it that animals and human beings have different functions? How is it that we don't have the exact same functionality? And who is the one who decided that this compound was going to be created for this specific purpose, for this specific function? So as I said before, in Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle says that human beings are created so that we can function in society, we can be political animals, we can live with one another and create eudaimonia, create happiness around us. But we don't discover who the creator of that final cause is. And Aristotle is going to call this creator of the final cause the primal mover. And for Aristotle, the primal mover was more like a principle of physics, a principle of causality. But once Aristotle is Christianized, the Christians are going to say that what Aristotle was alluding to is actually the presence of God, and that God is the one who created living creatures in different degrees, so that each one of them has different correlation, different rights, different duties in the kingdom of ends, which is the kingdom of God. So we'll talk about these things on Monday's class, but one of the things that you should be thinking about is that for Aristotle, one of the most interesting questions was, how is it that the soul gets activated, and where is the soul placed? Aristotle, when he talks about the soul of the human being, that's the one that doesn't, when it comes to the intellectuality or the contemplation aspect of the soul, that's the one that doesn't get located. And it's that soul that would be more akin to what we usually think of, this soul essence, ghostly spirit. But as I was saying in the first part of the video, it is precisely that soul that's now being studied in neurophilosophy and neurosciences as belonging to the brain, in this hylomorphism of which Aristotle spoke about, being this not mind and body dualism, which can be interpreted before we start studying the brain. But once we know what the brain does, once we know that it is precisely the brain that realizes these intellectual, contemplative activities, then everything that Aristotle says is a soul, even in the human being, it has a space, it has a place, it has a location in the body. And that way he sort of reduces the idea of the mystical aspects of a soul. So please review these materials, and on Monday we'll use the first half an hour of class to talk about Aristotle's idea of the different forms, different actualities that organisms can have.